The Christmas Killer. Subscribe for more horror stories. Chapter 1. The arrival. Detective Perez arrived in Frosthaven just as the first snow of the season began to fall. He was a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases. Assigned to the latest string of bizarre holiday disappearances, Perez had little patience for small-town mysteries that turned out to be nothing more than local legends. But Frosthaven's history of unsolved crimes had caught his attention. The townsfolk were wary of outsiders, but Perez's no-nonsense demeanor earned him cautious respect. He rented a room at the local inn and set up his base of operations in a vacant office at the Frosthaven Police Department. The first thing he noticed was how eerily quiet the town was at night, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Perez began his investigation by reviewing old police reports. The pattern was clear. Every year during the week leading up to Christmas, someone went missing. Their bodies were never found, but crude snowmen were always discovered near the sites of their last known whereabouts. The connection was too obvious to ignore. He interviewed locals who claimed to have seen strange things, shadows moving unnaturally, gusts of wind that seemed almost alive, and whispers that came from nowhere. At first, Perez dismissed these accounts as superstitions, but as he delved deeper, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. One frosty morning, a young boy stumbled upon a snowman in the woods that oozed a dark, viscous liquid. Perez was called to the scene and quickly cordoned off the area. As he carefully dismantled the snowman, his worst fears were confirmed. The remains of a missing person were encased within the icy structure. The discovery sent shockwaves through Frosthaven. Perez's demeanor hardened. He was no longer dealing with a simple missing persons case. The killer was taunting them, using the snowmen as grotesque trophies. Perez vowed to stop whoever was behind this. That night, as Perez reviewed his notes, he heard a strange sound outside his window, a low, mournful whistle carried by the wind. He dismissed it at first, but the sound grew louder and more insistent. Grabbing his coat, he stepped outside into the freezing night. The wind seemed to swirl around him, carrying faint whispers that sounded almost like voices. Perez strained to listen, but the words were indistinct. Just as he was about to head back inside, he caught sight of a lone snowman standing in the middle of the street. It hadn't been there earlier. Determined to understand the connection between the snowmen and the disappearances, Perez sought out the town historian, an elderly man named Edgar. Edgar shared the chilling legend of the Christmas Killer, a malevolent force born from the collective anguish of those who had perished in Frosthaven's harsh winters over the centuries. According to the legend, the killer's spirit manifested as an icy wind, claiming victims and hiding their bodies within snowmen. Perez listened intently, but remained skeptical. Legends didn't leave behind human remains. However, Edgar's account gave him a new lead: the abandoned settlement on the outskirts of town, where many of the original victims were said to have died. Perez ventured to the outskirts of Frosthaven, where the ruins of the old settlement lay buried beneath layers of snow and ice. The wind howled as he searched the crumbling structures, his flashlight casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. In one of the ruins, he discovered a journal belonging to a long-dead resident. The entries described a brutal winter in which dozens of travelers had been turned away from Frosthaven and left to die in the cold. The final entry read, "Their cries haunt the wind. They will not forgive us." Perez shivered, not from the cold, but from the chilling realization that the town's dark past was more intertwined with the present than anyone wanted to admit. Just as Perez began to piece together the puzzle, another disappearance rocked the town. This time it was the mayor's nephew, a young man named Jacob. A snowman appeared outside the mayor's home that night, its cold eyes seeming to stare directly at Perez when he arrived to investigate. The pressure mounted as the townspeople grew increasingly fearful. Perez knew he was running out of time. The killer, whatever or whoever it was escalating. He needed to act fast before another life was taken. Perez confronted Mayor Eleanor Brighton, suspecting that she knew more than she was letting on. Under his relentless questioning, she broke down and admitted that her family had a long history in Frosthaven, dating back to the time of the original settlement. Her great-grandfather had been one of the leaders who had turned away the desperate travelers, sealing their fate. "I thought it was just a story," she sobbed. "I didn't think it was real." Perez felt a pang of sympathy but quickly refocused. The past was catching up to Frosthaven, and unless he could find a way to break the cycle, the killings would continue. Armed with this new information, he prepared to confront the darkness that had haunted the town for generations. Perez combed through Frosthaven's icy streets, following any lead that could point to the whereabouts of the mayor's nephew, Jacob. The urgency weighed on him like the biting cold. Every clue seemed to lead to dead ends, until he stumbled upon an old trail leading into the dense forest. With his flashlight cutting through the dark, Perez pressed on. The wind whispered around him, carrying faint echoes of voices. The whispers grew louder as Perez neared a clearing. There, in the center, stood another snowman. His breath caught as he noticed a scrap of fabric frozen into the icy structure. Jacob's scarf. Perez was at a crossroads. The logical part of his mind urged him to focus on tangible evidence, but the chilling whispers and the eerie snowmen hinted at something far beyond his understanding. Returning to Edgar, the town historian, Perez demanded answers. "The wind," Edgar said gravely. "It's not just the weather. It's the voices of the past, Detective. They're trying to be heard." Perez's skepticism was fading, replaced by a growing dread. If the Christmas killer truly wasn't human, how could he stop it? Determined to put an end to the killings, Perez turned to the townsfolk for help. They revealed an old legend, a ritual that could calm the vengeful spirits. It required an offering of warmth and light, symbolizing the compassion that Frosthaven had once denied. Perez gathered the townspeople in the main square where a towering bonfire was lit. The wind howled as if resisting their efforts, but Perez stood firm. "To the spirits of the past," he called into the night, "we're here to make amends. We'll no longer turn away those in need. Let this fire be a symbol of our promise." The wind swirled violently before suddenly calming. The snowman in the square began to melt, revealing Jacob inside, shivering but alive. Relief swept through the crowd as Perez pulled him to safety. Despite the apparent success of the ritual, Perez knew the battle wasn't over. The spirit's anger had been soothed, but the root cause, Frosthaven's dark history, needed to be confronted. He delved deeper into the archives, uncovering records of countless others who had been turned away to perish in the cold. The final piece of the puzzle came when Perez discovered a hidden diary belonging to one of the town's founders. It detailed the deliberate decision to prioritize Frosthaven's resources over the lives of outsiders. The words were damning, and Perez knew he had to share them with the community. Perez gathered the townspeople once more, this time in the community hall. He read aloud from the diary, exposing the truth of Frosthaven's past. The room was silent, save for the occasional gasp of disbelief. Perez watched as the weight of guilt settled over the crowd. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can choose to do better. The Christmas killer isn't just a ghost story. It's a reminder of the lives lost because of our neglect. It's time to make this town a place where everyone is welcome." The townsfolk nodded, their expressions a mix of shame and determination. Perez felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Frosthaven could finally find redemption. Perez worked tirelessly to piece together the full history of Frosthaven. He interviewed elderly residents, scoured personal diaries donated to the town archives, and tracked down distant descendants of those who had lived in Frosthaven during the 1800s. The more he uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The town's prosperity had been built on a foundation of neglect and cruelty. Time and again, those in need had been turned away, whether travelers, the homeless, or the impoverished, and the town's leaders had repeatedly chosen self-interest over compassion. In an emergency town meeting, Perez revealed everything he had discovered. Standing in front of a packed community hall, he recounted the tale of the doomed travelers, the harsh winters, and the complicity of the town's leadership in perpetuating cycles of neglect. The crowd listened in stunned silence as he presented his final piece of evidence. Records proving that Mayor Eleanor Brighton's great-grandfather had been the one to bar the travelers from seeking refuge, sealing their fate. "The Christmas killer isn't a person," Perez said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. It's the manifestation of the anger and sorrow of those we've wronged, and it won't stop until we, all of us, acknowledge our part in this and make amends." Brighton stood, her face pale but resolute. "If this is true," she said, "then we owe it to the victims, past and present, to set things right." The crowd murmured in agreement, and for the first time, a sense of collective responsibility began to take hold. Perez organized a memorial ceremony to honor the forgotten travelers and all those who had suffered as a result of Frosthaven's neglect. The townspeople gathered at the cemetery, braving the bitter cold to pay their respects. A large plaque was erected bearing the names of the known victims and an inscription that read, "We remember, we repent, we will do better." As the ceremony began, the wind picked up, swirling gently around the gathered crowd. Perez stepped forward to address the spirits. "To those we have wronged," he said, his voice firm despite the icy air, "we are sorry. We acknowledge your pain and our failure to help you when you needed it most. We vow to remember your stories and to ensure that no one else suffers as you did." The wind grew stronger, but this time it carried warmth instead of biting cold. Snowflakes danced in the air, sparkling like tiny stars. The crowd watched in awe as the outlines of the lost travelers appeared, their expressions no longer angry but peaceful. One by one they nodded before fading into the swirling snow. In the days that followed, Frosthaven underwent a transformation. The town's residents came together to address the issues that had been ignored for too long. A new homeless shelter was built, funded by community donations. Programs were established to support those in need, ensuring that no one would be left out in the cold again. Mayor Brighton announced her resignation, citing her family's role in the town's dark history. She vowed to dedicate her remaining time in office to undoing the harm caused by generations of neglect. Perez, though reluctant, was offered a position on the town council to help guide Frosthaven toward a brighter future. As winter turned to spring, the snowmen that had once been symbols of terror melted away. The wind still whispered through the trees, but now it carried a different tune, one of hope and renewal. The legend of the Christmas killer became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of compassion and the dangers of forgetting those in need. Perez stood on the steps of the police station, watching as children played in the snow without fear. The scars of the past would never fully heal, but the town had taken its first steps toward redemption, and for the first time in years, Frosthaven felt like a place of peace. The end. Subscribe for more horror stories.